Okay, today the Securities and Exchange Commission is the most powerful regulatory body on Wall Street. Joseph Kennedy was a well-connected investor on Wall Street during the crash of 1929, enabling him to see firsthand the need for investor protections. This experience was formative to his involvement and leadership in the Securities and Exchange Commission a few years after the crash. This is important to understand why the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, has so many requirements for publicly traded companies. Today we will examine Joe Kennedy's experience on Wall Street and how this affected his influence at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Let's begin with an examination of Joe Kennedy's early career. His early career in banking led to Joe Kennedy learning the intricacies of the banking industry. Graduating Harvard University in 1912, Joe took a job with the Columbia Trust Company, eventually becoming a highly respected bank examiner. Joe Kennedy's father was one of the owners and founders of the Columbia Trust Company. At one point, the Columbia Trust Company was facing a hostile takeover by another bank. Joe Kennedy stepped in and helped raise over $100,000 to rescue Columbia Trust Company, which earned him the respect of the board of directors and the owners and founders of the Columbia Trust Company. And at the age of 25, he became the youngest bank president in the United States as the president of Columbia Trust Company. Accepting a new position with a Boston brokerage firm, Hayden Stone and Company, in 1920 was a major milestone in Joe Kennedy's career. Now that you know about Joe Kennedy's early career, let's examine a few of the strategies he utilized to build wealth in the stock market. Joe Kennedy used many strategies to gain wealth on Wall Street. There is the instance of the Yellow Cab Company and the Checkered Cab Company. The Checkered Cab Company was attempting a hostile takeover of the Yellow Cab Company. So the Yellow Cab Company hired Joe Kennedy to manipulate their stock price, which confused the Checkered Cab Company and knocked them out of the game. So they stopped trying to take over the Yellow Cab Company. The owner of the Yellow Cab Company, Mr. Hertz, went on to reward Joe Kennedy with hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash and stock in the company. That company later went on to become Hertz Rent-A-Car. He was able to manipulate stock prices of various companies because of a lack of regulation in the industry. He witnessed many brokerage houses on Wall Street manipulate stock prices as well and take advantage of retail investors. He began selling many of his stock positions in various stocks when he saw a stock market sell-off coming due to the unregulated nature of the stock market at the time. That helped him avoid the market crash of 1929 when a lot of people were losing millions of dollars and going bankrupt. He was making millions of dollars and becoming more successful. Now that we know more about his fortune on the stock market, let us turn to Joe Kennedy's investment in politics. In 1934, Joe Kennedy was appointed by the first commissioner of the Securities and Exchange Commission by FDR. He assisted in fundraising for FDR's campaign for president. When FDR appointed him commissioner of the Securities and Exchange Commission, there were many opponents of this decision because of Joe Kennedy's unscrupulous actions in the stock market. But FDR actually went on to say, what better way to catch a crook than to hire a crook? Joe Kennedy knew how insiders on Wall Street manipulated the stock market, and he helped put in place safeguards to stop those practices. Now that we have a better picture of Joe Kennedy's career and public service, I will now conclude with the following. Joseph Kennedy was a well-connected investor on Wall Street during the crash of 1929, enabling him to see firsthand the need for investor protections. This experience was formative in his involvement and leadership in the Securities and Exchange Commission a few years after the crash. This evening we have examined the early career of Joe Kennedy, his experience on Wall Street, and finally his involvement in American politics. Joe Kennedy's illustrious career and public success enabled him to lead the Securities and Exchange Commission as its first commissioner and protect investors against the very practices himself and others utilized to gain enormous wealth on Wall Street during the 1920s. Thank you.